Chapter 9. Exactly 5 years, 11 days, 14 hours, and 6 minutes ago, this is Harold Hutchins. Harold is 6 years old, and he lives with his mom and sister at 1520 Vine Street in Pico, Ohio. Harold's parents had just gotten divorced, and his dad had moved to Nevada about 6 months ago. None of this had been easy for Harold. He didn't talk about it. In fact, Harold Hutchins didn't talk much at all. He kept to himself mostly and drew pictures. Lots and lots of pictures. Harold liked to draw monsters and superheroes. The monsters he created were evil and ferocious, and his superheroes were always virtuous and brave. They were never far away when you needed them. Harold loved getting lost in his wonderful paper and pencil adventures where the good guys always won and the bad guys always ended up getting the kick in the pants that they deserved. Today it just started out like any ordinary school day. Harold got dressed and ate his breakfast, trying hard not to think about the tough day that lay ahead of him. Harold was in kindergarten at Jerome Horwitz Elementary School, and he hated every minute of it. His teacher was mean, the bullies were jerks, and the principal was just plain evil. The best Harold could do was try to fit in and not draw any unnecessary attention to himself. He brushed his teeth and carefully placed his pencils and his favorite drawings into his backpack, unaware that today was going to be a day that would change his life forever. Harold's mom helped him put his backpack on at the front door. "Maybe you'll make a friend at school today," she said tearfully. "Nah," said Harold, emotionless. "I don't think so." "What about that little boy next door who moved in last weekend?" said Harold's mom. "What's his name?" Harold shrugged. He hadn't seen the boy once or twice, but they hadn't actually met. "Maybe you should go over and introduce yourself," said Harold's mom. "Wouldn't it be nice to have a friend who lives next door?" Harold shrugged again. Harold's mom hugged him and kissed the top of his head. She got $2 out of her purse and handed them to Harold. "This is for your lunch, okay, honey?" she said. "I don't want you using this money at the candy machine or the pop machine." "I won't," said Harold. That much was true. Harold knew his lunch money would never make it to the candy machine or the pop machine. Harold's $2 usually never even made it to the school. They were always taken away from him by a 6th grade bully named Kipper. Kipper Krupp was the biggest and meanest kid at Jerome Horwitz Elementary School. He was the captain of the wrestling team and the nephew of the school principal, so everybody treated him like royalty. Kipper's 3 creepy friends, Loogie Bug and Finkstein, also got special treatment. They all paraded up and down the school hallways like they owned the place. Every day, Kipper and his 3 friends stole lunch money from the kindergartners. Most of the kids just handed it over without question. It was a lot less trouble and much less painful than getting a wedgie or a punch in the stomach. Kipper Krupp loved to terrorize kindergartners, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. If Kipper ever got into a jam, all he had to do was call on his uncle, Principal Krupp. "Uncle Benny," Kipper would cry, "that kindergartner just hit my fist with her stomach." "Oh, she did she?" Mr. Krupp would yell, turning to the small child writhing in pain on the floor. "How dare you hurt my nephew's fist?" Mr. Krupp had a zero-tolerance policy in place at Jerome Horwitz Elementary School, and he was very strict about it. He had once suspended a 3rd grader just for saying the word gun. To be honest, the boy had actually said the word gum, but it sounded a lot like gun, and there was no room for common sense when it came to zero tolerance. Harold knew from experience that the wisest thing to do was stay out of Kipper's way, so his daily walk to school became more like an obstacle course. He quickly ran in spurts, dashing from trash can to mailbox to tree, hiding behind anything he could find, just in case Kipper and his friends were nearby. The worst section of Harold's mad dash to school was the intersection of Dogwood Drive and Rosita Lane. There was nowhere to hide between the big tree by the coffee shop and the sign at the gas station across the street. He just had to wait for the walk signal, run for it, and hope for the best. Most days, Harold was lucky, but his luck was about to run out. Harold crouched quietly behind the coffee shop tree, watching the traffic lights, concentrating on the cars, and looking out for Kipper. It was very stressful. After a couple of minutes, the cars came to a stop, the walk signal lit up, and Harold took one last glance left and right. It was now or never. He jumped up and ran across the street as fast as he could go. When he reached the other side of the street, Harold leaped behind the display sign in front of the gas station. He had made it! He was safe. Or so he thought. "Hey, you stupid kid!" shouted Billy Bill, the owner of the gas station. "Get away from that sign!" Harold's heart was pounding in his throat as Billy Bill stomped toward him and grabbed the back of his t-shirt. He yanked Harold out from behind the sign, making a terrible scene. "That sign is a valuable piece of merchandise," Billy Bill screamed. "Not a toy for you to play with." I'm sorry, Harold whispered, frantically trying to pull away, but it was too late. Billy Bill's loud shouting had caught the attention of Kipper Krupp and his 3 creepy thugs. The 4 bullies strode across the street toward Harold. "Hey, kid!" yelled Kipper. "Why are you bothering this nice man?" "I'm sorry," Harold said again, looking down. Billy Bill released Harold with a shove, causing him to fall to the ground. "You boys better take care of your little friend there," Billy Bill said, "or I'm going to call the cops on him." "Don't worry, mister," said Kipper with an evil grin. "We'll take good care of him." Kipper yanked Harold up by his arm while Loogie pulled Harold's backpack open and started rummaging through it. "Hey, look, I found his lunch money," said Loogie. "Gimme it," yelled Kipper. Loogie dutifully put the money into Kipper's moist, dirty hand. None of this behavior appeared to disturb Billy Bill at all. In fact, he seemed to enjoy watching it. "You gotta learn to stick up for yourself, boy," Billy Bill said to Harold, chuckling, "or people are going to bully you your whole life." The 4 thugs dragged Harold across the street toward the school parking lot. Harold's luck was running out, but fortunately, as we all know, luck has a way of changing, and Harold's bad luck was about to change in a very big way. Chapter 10. Meet George. This is George Beard. George is 5 3/4 years old. He and his parents had just moved from Michigan into the house next door to Harold and his family. George was what adults like to call a precocious child. His mother had taught him to read and write when he was 4 years old, and he currently scored higher on tests than most children twice his age. George's former teachers had suggested that he skip ahead to the 3rd grade, but his parents decided it would be better if George stayed in a classroom with kids his own age. To this day, George's parents were still not sure if they had made the right decision. On one hand, George had developed good social skills and had been well liked by his classmates. That was good. On the other hand, George was bored in class and often got into mischief. That was bad. George had never really liked school very much. He preferred riding his skateboard, watching monster movies, and reading comics and graphic novels. George liked writing stories, too. He had filled up more than 20 spiral notebooks with marvelously silly adventure stories that he had written all by himself. Many of George's stories had gotten him into trouble when he read them out loud at his old school. His classmates loved them, but his teachers thought they were rude, violent, and totally inappropriate. The fart that ate Detroit. "I hope things will be better here in Ohio," said George's mother as she helped him get ready for his very first day of classes at Jerome Horwitz Elementary School. "Your father and I bought you this nice tie to wear at school today." "A tie?" cried George. "Kids don't wear ties." "Well, you're going to wear one," said George's mother. "I want you to make a good first impression." "Aw, come on, Mom," said George. "Ties are for nerds." "Oh, for heaven's sake," said George's mom. "Your father wears a tie. Is he a nerd?" Kind of," said George. "Don't be ridiculous," said George's mom. "You're wearing a tie and that's final." "Rats," said George. George put his backpack on and reluctantly hugged his mom out the door. He was still a little upset about the whole tie thing. "Have a good first day at school, dear," said George's mom. "Mm-hmm," said George. George grabbed his skateboard from the bushes by the driveway and started off towards school. It was about 5 blocks away, and the sidewalks were mostly smooth with hardly any pebbles. Good for skateboarding. The ride to school had been very pleasant, actually, until George reached the corner of Dogwood Drive and Rosita Lane. There was some kind of commotion going on from the gas station across the street, and George watched it intently as he waited for the traffic light to change. He saw the gas station guy shove a yellow-haired kid to the ground. Then he saw some mean-looking kids yank the boy up and steal his money. This was not good. Finally, the light changed and George walked across the street toward the gas station. He stood by the display sign while the attendant laughed at the yellow-haired kid and told him he needed to learn to stick up for himself. George was furious. Chapter 11. Furious George. There is not a whole lot you can do when you are a little kid who encounters injustice. Your natural desire is to set things right, but that can often backfire, resulting in even greater injustices. The sad truth is, big people usually have all the power. You can't force anybody to be kind or fair or honorable, especially if you're only 43 inches tall and weigh only 50 pounds. That's why it's important to be smart. Free break inspection. George Beard had just witnessed the most hostile and unfair thing he had ever seen. The bad guys outnumbered him by 5 to 1 and and outweighed him by probably 700 pounds. But George was smarter than all of them put together, and he knew it. As the bullies dragged Harold across the street, George looked around for him the best way to make things right. He focused on the display sign next to him. The sign read, "Free brake inspection." This was a busy intersection, and George knew that a tiny change on this sign could create a great deal of pandemonium. So he reached over to the sign and removed the letters K and E from the word brake.
"Hey!" screamed Billy Bill. "You get away from that sign right now, you hear? What is wrong with you kids these days?"
Billy Bill marched over to George, yelling and waving his hands in the air frantically. He reached out to grab George by the shirt collar, but he never got the chance. At that very moment, a violet Volkswagen jumped the curb and screeched up next to Billy Bill. Two old ladies flew out of the car, screaming at the top of their lungs. "Free bra inspection?" shouted the driver as he smacked Billy Bill over the head with her purse. "That's offensive! How dare you!" yelled the other lady, hitting Billy Bill with her cane. "Women are human beings, not toys for you to play with." "You're a male chauvinist pig!" screamed a third lady, who had run over from the coffee shop across the street with a group of her angry female friends. They each took turns kicking Billy Bill repeatedly in the knees as other women drivers slammed on their brakes and rushed forward to join in on the ferocious female fight for equality. "You gotta learn to stick up for yourself," George said to Billy Bill, smiling, "or people are gonna bully you your whole life." George walked past the giant traffic jam that was forming and ignored Billy Bill's tear-filled cries for mercy as the kicking and whacking and hair-pulling and foot-stomping continued. George was looking for that yellow-haired kid. He skateboarded over to the elementary school and circled back toward the parking lot. There he saw Kipper and his creepy cohorts laughing and cheering as they tore up Harold's drawings and snapped each of his pencils in half. "Leave him alone!" shouted George. The sixth-grade bullies turned and looked at the tiny kindergartner who stood defiantly before them. "Ha, ha, ha!" laughed Kipper. "What you gonna do if we don't? I'm gonna Indiana Jones ya!" George said as he untied his tie and twirled it threateningly between his outstretched hands. "Get him!" yelled Kipper. The bullies ran in for the attack, and George let them have it. Chapter 12, the incredibly graphic violence chapter in Flipperama, Indiana George and the Tie of Doom. This chapter contains scenes of intense brutality and is intended for mature audiences only. For those of us who aren't very mature, we proudly introduce the art of Flipperama. The Kipper Whipper. The Attacker Smacker. The Tormentor Preventer. Chapter 13, The Detention. "I don't want you guys messing with me ever again," George said firmly as the bullies squealed in high-pitched terror. "And that yellow-haired kid is off limits too. You mess with us, you answer to the tie." George snapped his tie in the air one last time, causing the four sobbing sixth-graders to shriek like baboons. Uncle Benny!" Kipper wailed through his tears. Suddenly, Mr. Krupps came storming out of the building. "What's going on out here?" he screamed. "That little kid beat us up," Kipper sobbed.
"Oh, he did he?" yelled Mr. Krupp as he grabbed George by the arm. "I don't take kindly to bullies in the school."
"They're the bullies!" cried Harold, pointing at Kipper and his three frightened friends. Those guys were just about to beat that kid up. He was just defending himself." Mr. Krupp reached over and grabbed Harold by his arm.
"I don't like liars either," he growled.
Mr. Krupp yanked both boys to the detention room.
"You two troublemakers are going to stay here until you've learned your lesson," he shouted, then slammed the door. "So much for a good first impression," said George. The two boys sat in silence for several minutes. Harold opened his backpack and took out a notebook and the pointy half of one of his broken pencils. He started to draw. "What grade are you in?" asked George. "Kindergarten," said Harold. "Me too," said George. "I'm new. We just moved here 3 days ago." "Oh," said Harold, "I think you live right next door to my house." "Really?" said George. George glanced over and noticed that Harold was drawing a giant monster. "Hey, you're a good drawer," George said. "Thanks," said Harold. George watched as Harold drew a flying hero zapping the monster with a laser beam. "Cool," said George, pointing to the superhero. "What's that guy's name?" Harold shrugged. "He doesn't have a name." "How come?" asked George.
Harold shrugged again. It's just a picture, he said. It's not really a story. Oh, said George. George watched intently as Harold finished his picture. When he was done, Harold folded the page back and started drawing a new picture on the next page. Do you want to draw too? Harold asked. I have some more pencils. They're broken, but the pointy parts still work okay. No, said George. I can't draw good. I'm a writer. Oh, said Harold. He tore some fresh pages out from the back of his notebook and handed them to George. Here, you can write on these if you want. George took the papers and thought for a long time. Then he wrote The Adventures of Dogman at the top of the first page, and at the bottom he wrote By George and... Hey, what's your name, kid? George asked. Harold, said Harold. George wrote Harold's name down at the bottom. I'm going to write a comic book, said George. You can draw the pictures, okay? Okay, said Harold. And that is how George and Harold became friends and started their publishing empire on the very same day. Chapter 14, The Adventures of Dogman, Action, Laughs, Fleas, by George and Harold. The Adventures of Dogman by George and Harold. One time there was a police guy. His partner was a dog named Greg. They were good at catching criminals and stuff. Ow! But one day there was a bomb. We have to stop the bomb, Greg. But they were too late. Kablooey! The bomb blew up and they got hurted. An ambulance took them to the hospital. How do you feel, old friend? Rough! Me too. Soon the doctor came in with sad news. Boo-hoo! I am sorry, Greg, but your body is dying. Your head is dying too, cop. Rats. I sure hate my dying head. But then, hey, I got an idea, Nurse Lady. Why don't we sew Greg's head on the cop's body? Good idea, Nurse Lady. You're a genius. Hooray! So then they had a big operation. The doctor cut off Greg's head and sewed it on cop's body. What a lucky day. And so, hooray for Dogman! Dogman was the best of all cops. He could sniff crooks with his dog nose. Rats, sniff, sniff. He could hear crimes with his dog ears. Rats. And best of all, he could punch criminals with his human fists. Pow! Ow! I mean rats! Quick, Dogman, where is the crook? Roof, roof. He's up on the roof. What is he wearing? Pant, 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 pant. He's wearing pants. How'll we ever get up there? Bark, bark. Good idea, Dogman. Let's climb the bark of this tree. And so, we caught the bad guy. We couldn't have did it without you. Dogman was the greatest cop of ever. But he had one mortal fear. Vacuum cleaner. Dogman saw the vacuum cleaner. He ran and hid. Oh, I forgot. Dogs are scared of vacuum cleaners. But nobody knew that somebody was watching. Somebody evil. It was Petey, the world's most evilest cat. Ha ha ha! Now I know Dogman's weakness. So Petey invented an evil vacuum robot. Go, my precious, go and suck up all the money from the bank. Okay. Ha ha ha! Hey, no fair! Quick, Dogman, a robot is robbing the bank. Dogman ran to save the day, but then, Dogman ran away. I'll get you, Dogman. He ran and ran. Finally, Dogman got cornered in a corner. I'll kill you. The vacuum cleaner got closer and closer. Dogman got scareder and scareder. The vacuum robot leaped attackishly, but then look at what happened. Pop, the vacuum got unplugged. Dogman wasn't scared no more. He beat it up, the robot. Pow, then he followed the cord. It led straight to Petey's hideout. Uh-oh, then Petey got arrested. Rats, if only I would have made that cord 6 inches longer. Dogman was the hero. Go boy, Dogman, shake. Wine, wine, wine. Good idea, let's have some wine. Non-alcoholic wine. Hooray for Dogman. The end. Chapter 15, The Plan. Mr. Krupp's day had been very busy, and he'd completely forgotten all about the 2 boys he had banished to the detention room. By the time the final bell rang at 2:45, George and Harold had finished their very first comic book. Hey, this comic book turned out pretty good, said George. Yep, said Harold, smiling. I bet we could make copies of this and sell them for 25 cents each, said George. The 2 boys gathered their things and walked out the front door of the school. We should start our own comic book company, said George. Let's do it, said George. We can call it Treehouse Comics Incorporated. Why Treehouse? Asked Harold. 'Cause my dad is building me a treehouse in our backyard, said George. It's gonna have electricity and a TV and everything. We can make our comic books up there. Awesome, said Harold. George and Harold walked by the trash bin where Kipper and his friends were just about to administer killer wedgies to a couple of kindergartners. "Oh, Kippy!" called George. The bullies turned and saw George reaching for his tie. Then suddenly, their eyes filled with horror. They released their prey and ran away, waving their arms and yipping like wiener dogs. "I think I'm going to wear a tie every day from now on," said George. "I think that's a good idea," said Harold. As George and Harold walked home, the two friends talked about their favorite movies and games, which videos were the funniest, and what kind of bubble gum blew the best bubbles. Said Harold. "All that talk about bubble gum is making me hungry." "Come on over to my house," said George. "I can make a mean peanut butter and gummy worm sandwich." "Really?" said Harold. "Yep," George said. "The secret is the chocolate syrup." "Okay," said Harold. Soon the boys reached George's house and headed for the backyard. George's dad was hard at work building George's new tree house. "Hi, Pop," said George. "Hey, buddy," said George's dad. "How was your first day in your new school?" "Okay," said George. "And who's your new friend?" George's dad asked. "This is Harold," said George. "He's a good drawer." "Hello, Harold," said George's dad. "Hi," said Harold. "Well, we've got a lot of work to do, Pop," said George. "Do you want us to bring you a peanut butter and gummy worm sandwich?" No, thank you," said George's dad. The two new friends walked into George's house, made some sandwiches, and got right to work. George and Harold knew it was up to them to put a stop to Kipper Krup's reign of terror, so they made a long list of Kipper's strengths and weaknesses to get a better understanding of their mortal enemy. After a few minutes, Harold began to feel discouraged. "This is terrible," said Harold. "Kipper Krupp has so many strengths. I can only think of one weakness." "What's that?" asked George. "Well, he's kinda dumb," said Harold. George smiled and wrote down "kinda dumb" under weaknesses. "That's all we need," said George. Chapter 16, Super Spies. The next day at school, Harold stuck close to George. The two boys spent their every free moment spying on Kipper and gathering as much information as they could about their enemy. They wrote down Kipper's locker number and the type of padlock he used. They took note of Kipper's schedule and paid special attention to what he normally did between classes. They took measurements and even stayed after school to spy on Kipper's wrestling practices. By the end of the week, George and Harold knew Kipper's schedule better than Kipper knew it. Kipper Krupp was a creature of habit. Every day he did the exact same things at the exact same times. At the end of every school day, Kipper would go to his locker and unlock his heavy-duty padlock with a key he kept on a thick metal chain around his neck. Kipper would place his padlock on top of his locker, then open the locker door. Next, Kipper would empty his pockets, putting his valuables inside the locker. His cell phone always went on the top shelf, and the money he'd stolen from the kindergartners would always get crammed into a duffel bag at the bottom of the locker. Finally, Kipper would grab his padlock from the top of the locker, put it back on the door, and click it shut to lock it. After wrestling practice, Kipper would go back to his locker and unlock it the very same way. He'd retrieve his cell phone, grab his heavy-duty padlock from the top of his locker, and put it back on the door. Finally, he'd click a shot to lock everything back up again. Surprisingly, Kipper usually left all of his stolen money in his locker every night. Perhaps Kipper thought the money was safest in his locker. Nobody could open that locker without a key. Nobody but Kipper had the key, and Kipper never took the key off of his neck, not even in the shower. "We'll never get that key away from Kipper," said Harold as the two boys walked up the aisles of the local hardware store. "We don't need the key," said George. "We just need this." George picked up a brand new padlock from the home security section. "This is the exact same kind of padlock that Kipper uses on his locker," said George. "But it won't have the same key," said Harold. "Each one has a different key." "I know," said George. "So how is that padlock going to help us?" asked Harold. "You'll see," said George, smiling. After the boys paid for their brand new heavy-duty padlock, they went to the toy shop across the street. Down at the end of aisle 3, near the beads and jewelry, George found what he was looking for, a Susie Sunshine Friendship Bracelet Kit. "What is that for?" asked Harold. "We've got to make a couple of friendship bracelets this weekend," said George. "Why? What for?" said Harold. "You'll see," said George, smiling even more. That weekend, George and Harold spent a lot of time drawing up plans and designing pranks that will help put an end to the bully situation at Jerome Horowitz Elementary School. Then the two boys went through their homes, collecting everything they needed for the job. George found a long roll of shelf lining paper in his kitchen and measured it carefully. "Hey, Mom, can we have this?" said George. "It's for school." "I suppose so," said George's mom. Harold found some old pants and dress shoes that his dad had left behind when he moved away. He was pretty sure his dad wouldn't mind if they nailed them to George's wooden stilts. I still don't understand how we're going to hide these stilts in the school, said George as he practiced walking on them. You'll see, said Harold, who knew a few tricks of his own.